Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. Our next conversation will definitely be entertaining and informative. We're speaking about love on the job. Joining us is Cavelle Joseph-St Omer, President of the Human Resource Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago. We say HRMATT, of course. And Cavelle, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. This is a topic that I think just spans generations, to say the least, and you would have recently shared on it, and you are here this morning. And you know, one of the first things I would love to get into is, aside from what the layman thinks about love on the job, what is the HR perspective?
Well, love on the job is a delicate thing to manage in the workspace, right? First, in HR, of course, we aim to keep the environment focused on work and the purpose for the organization, right? And keep employees focused on that. However, we spend so much time in the workplace. That's just the reality. For me, my average time is 10 to 12 hours. So I run the risk, or people run the risk, of meeting their partner, spouse, love, interest in the workplace. That is the reality. We thrive on human connections. We're social creatures by nature. So knowing this in advance, first in HR, it's best to put policies and procedures in place to manage it.
Right.
Because it is going to happen, whether we like it or not. That's just the reality. It's human beings we're dealing with. And by the time you get familiar with someone in the workplace, you start sharing conversations, life experiences, human connections are formed, real relationships are formed. In fact, sometimes your work colleagues almost like your family, or even closer to you than your family, because you spend so much of your waking moments in the workplace, your productive hours in the workplace. So therefore, that happens for us. I don't want to say we frown on it, but at the same time, we could understand it and try to manage it, right? And that's the most important thing, managing it and creating the right environment in the workplace so you don't have a toxic culture. Now, I had a random person, to be honest. I was on television on one occasion speaking about sexual harassment, and a young lady saw that interview, caught my number from the news station and reached out to me and shared with me what she was experiencing in her workplace and wanted me to intervene on her behalf. And I didn't know this young lady at all. She worked in a family managed business.
Right.
And in that culture, everybody apparently had relationships with each other, and managers felt it was acceptable to approach young members joining the organization expecting that they would fall into the culture of that company. But this young lady was not interested in a relationship with the manager, and she had these explicit text messages on her phone, on her WhatsApp. She reported it to the organization, and they never treated with the issue because this is our culture, right? I mean, from the owner of the business go right down, they knew that this was happening in the workplace. So it took me now having to write on her behalf and also making recommendations. Needless to say, the company in that instance sent the manager on vacation, so it was not disciplinary in any way, because they were concerned about the fact that he was married, not concerned about the fact that he was abusing his authority and power over the receptionist. He happened to be the #1 salesperson for that company as well. So he's an income generating asset to the owners of that business, and she was just the receptionist. That is how they treated it. So therefore, they sent him on vacation. They accepted the fact that they needed to have a policy. They rolled out, and I put it in inverted commas, they rolled out the policy all to appease the situation so that she doesn't take action against it. But eventually she left because it just continued. And I'm talking about explicit messages, what he felt like doing her, what he felt like touching her. He would pass his hand on her while she walked through the office. It was that bad. And she moved on. And even when she moved on, the owner of that business contacted her new employers and tried to get her dismissed from that organization, and didn't pay her last salary. So that was, these are things people experience, real things people experience. So I had to do a lot of writing. This was a perfect stranger, by the way. It's not someone that I knew. Perfect stranger. But I'm telling you this because if allowed, if permitted, it ends up very toxic when people believe that this is the acceptable way, and you come in with your own values, your own way of handling your affairs, and you're not participating in that dynamic, basically.
Now, speaking of affairs, about a week ago, there was the large controversy of the former CEO of BP being sacked because of his multiple affairs. And interestingly, BP took the turn of giving employees till September 1st to reveal all their affairs. Now, from what I read, it's not entirely that they are going to be sacked or disciplinary action being taken against them. But as you mentioned, considering the culture, they will be making some accommodations and changes to the HR policy. Now, in that particular instance, would you describe that as, and this is, of course, personal opinion, but still, good HR? Or questionable? Because when you think about it, they are not altogether stopping what you mentioned as inevitable. But in terms of making the accommodations, the specifics are that they are looking at persons who manage potential spouses. That is the only stipulation that has been shared so far. What are your thoughts on that change in policy?
Right. So companies, in some instances, that acknowledge, as I said, that workplace relationships will happen, and you do want to have a very productive, harmonious work environment. So there's not a total ban on relationships. There's some companies that totally ban it, and there are others that will now put policies in place to manage it. So in the BP case, BP has over 4,500 managers. So we're not even talking junior staff yet, right? And from a policy perspective, following the sacking of Looney, they took a position that all managers who are in relationships must disclose those relationships by that date, by September 1st, or face disciplinary charges if they don't disclose and it's discovered thereafter, right? So that is what we will fund. This is a love contract now. The organization has in its policies, or introducing policies where you have to disclose and declare relationships, and because of the nature of those relationships, depending on, for example, if it's a manager and a subordinate type of working relationship, and you're in a romantic relationship, they will now have to take a position in terms of how they treat with it, whether you now have to be transferred to another location, to another department altogether. They have to assess it. So that's why disclosure is so important, to assess the risk associated by those relationships. Now, you know, when people in love, right? Especially some women, and we see countless examples of it, with that commitment and that need for both parties to succeed, or helping each other succeed, it could blur the lines a bit in terms of your decision making when you factor love into the equation. And there is this show on Netflix called Partner Track that I watched, law firm, and this young woman, Asian woman, dating this Caucasian man, and when she recognized that she was on track for partner, and he was as well, she assisted him because she was way ahead of him. She assisted him with his cases and all of that, and then eventually he went behind her back, approached the CEO, and he was made partner over her, and she assisted him. So what I'm saying, why they want you to disclose, because in romantic settings, you tend to now lose your sense of judgment sometimes, and you make decisions based on the fact that you have this romantic involvement and you want to see a partner do well, or you want to see him succeed, or it may very well be a conflict of interest, a real conflict of interest, where you know there's business, there's money to be made, etc., and you now lose all sense of your reasonable judgment and open up the organization, expose the organization now to risk.
So let me ask outright, do you think that sort of love contract, as you described it, is something that could apply to Trinidad and Tobago society?
Yes, and companies here do have it, especially in the financial sector. Now, you mentioned the BP case, you also have the RBC case out of Canada, where the CFO was terminated because she failed to disclose her relationship, and this was someone who was reporting directly to her, younger than her, right? So you had the cougar argument and all sorts of arguments jumping into the mix. But because of the reputation risk to the bank, where your head of finance now is involved in a relationship, they now have to make that decision. So if it's disclosed and it's on a record, it protects the company, especially when you look at the favoritism arguments. You will now pay attention to whether or not someone has an unfair advantage over another employee because of it. It also protects you from the harassment cases that result, because when relationships go sour, all of a sudden you hear about sexual harassment and bullying and whatever else. That is a reality as well too. Or when it's on reciprocated love as well too. Those allegations come up as well. You also have to look at the issue of violence in the workplace now. We've seen even right here, I mean, the potential for relationships when they go south to really result in violence. where a partner turns up on the job, or you end up having a fight on the job as well too. And then, of course, then there's the affairs, where married people are having affairs in the workspace as well, and a spouse discovers it and turns up to basically confront the partner in the workspace. So it creates so much risk to employers, and you now have a legal responsibility for the health and wellness of all employees. And when violence now enters into the workspace, you run the risk of harming others who are not a part of this dynamic. You know, when someone come and they, whether it's a stabbing, a shooting, or choking, which again I've had to deal with, by the way, where a spouse turned up and was choking his partner in the workspace, and he was an officer of the law too in that dynamic, because he felt that his partner was having a relationship with someone on the job, and he turned up on the job in his uniform, so it was also to intimidate as well too.
Yeah.
And these are things playing out right here in Trinidad and Tobago in our workspaces. So it's just that because it's we know that love is all nice. I mean, trust me, I love love, all right? I'm happily married. I love my husband. At the end of the day, love. Love to see people happy in their relationships. But there also has to be a line that is drawn when it comes to the workspace. Then PDA, public displays of affection in the workspace. So you have your partner and you're all passing, hugging, kissing each other, holding hands. You know, especially when it's young people entering into the workspace and they have not learned yet workplace etiquette, they have not been trained well, and it's young love, and they're expressing it. It's not appropriate for the workspace just the same. So we try to discourage all these things by documenting it, because we cannot assume that we are all socialized in the same manner and that we all have the same values. Our value systems differ based on how we are raised and socialized. So therefore, to deal with all of that, you put policies in place. So this is the policy, follow the policy, full stop. Otherwise, there are disciplinary consequences. So BP certainly signal the fact that if you do not disclose by this date and it is discovered, just like the CEO, you will be going home, essentially.
You know, something that you just mentioned there, definitely food for thought. The fact that we sometimes we take it for granted, and everybody's socialized the way we are. We cannot make assumptions. And you also mentioned where we draw the line. So where would you say is the best place to draw the line within the workplace, if you can?
So I would always say it depends on the size of the organization. So when we look at the financial sector and the banks, because they have so many locations, so many departments, they could afford to separate people reasonably, right? So it's not to discourage people finding true love, because it has happened. People got married, they have families, you know, so it's not to discourage it, it's to manage it based on your organization's dynamics. But if it's a small business and you cannot separate people, there's no way to draw the line, then someone have to choose. The minute this relationship is serious enough and you feel like it is going somewhere, somebody have to decide to leave. So that's a policy position as well you could take, that the both persons cannot stay employed with the organization and therefore someone leaves. Then the other position could be a total ban altogether, which would be the other extreme side of it, where a company takes the position that we don't want any workplace romance at all, period. And that in itself could be a bit discouraging especially to someone who, again, who spend all their time in the workspace and don't have the time to date, to dedicated all this time to this business. And as a consequence of that, dating is difficult. You see it if you watch Grey's Anatomy.
I love your movie references.
Yes, nobody watch it, it's all romance in the hospital. All over the hospital is romance, right? Because doctors spend so much time in the workplace, doctors, nurses, doctors and doctors. And again, you saw where conflict arose, hiding on behalf of the person when someone died as a consequence of a surgery that went botched. You know, so that's where the risk, because it really has the potential for blurring your judgment when love is factored in to decision making. So I will say also too, when you consider the dynamic between public, private, and family-owned and managed businesses. Because remember, in a family business, it tends to be husband and wife managing the business, aunts, uncles, like it's all family, and those are relationships in of itself. So in that dynamic, it might be or will be acceptable because that's just a family-owned and managed business. So to someone like you and I entering into a family-owned and managed business, you have to understand maybe the rules apply to them because it's their business, but it wouldn't necessarily apply to you. So I will examine it based on the culture of the organization, the maturity of that company and the individuals in it as well, because there are people out there who can exercise reasonable judgment, just the same. They're not hairy-fairy about it either. So it depends, after you assess your workplace culture and what you're trying to create in the workspace, that you will make policy decisions based on that. Yeah.
Sounds good. Sounds like a lot that we still have to learn to navigate, but at least we have a head start. So we thank you very much for that very informative bit of input. Cavelle, always a pleasure to have you on the Now Morning Show.
It's a pleasure being here, ladies, talking about love.
All right, we'll keep the love going, but in the right way, with the right policy, and we'll come back with more after these messages, guys.
Every June 19th, Fyzabad hosts Labor Day celebrations, bringing together workers and citizens to honor the historic struggle and renew their commitments to workers' rights, highlighting the labor movement's enduring legacy.